Morning, students. So in this video, I'll explain Section 7, Subsection 1, Clause A of CGST Act, which deals with the supply. So as you know, GST is levied on supply of goods or services. Therefore, first it is important to understand the topic called as supply, because that is what a taxable event. Under GST concept, supply is a taxable event. Therefore, first we have to learn the supply. Supply is defined in Section 7, Subsection 1, Clause A of CGST Act, and also Schedule 1, which is deemed supply. Now I'll explain these two concepts, actual supply and deemed supply. Have a look at the definition, what is given in the Act. Section 7, Subsection 1, Clause A says, supply includes all forms of supply of goods or services or both, such as sale, transfer, barter, sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, or disposal. Total 8 categories are covered. Total 8 categories are covered. These 8 categories are only examples, not exhaustive. Okay, that is not the complete list of supply. So anything will be supplied. Okay, such as, because the word says such as, this is an inclusive definition. Because of this word such as, it is an inclusive definition. So therefore, these are the popular forms of supply. Government is not saying that these are the only supplies. These are the popular forms of supplies. It is similar to Section 2, Clause 24 of the Income Tax Act. Section 2, Clause 24 of the Income Tax Act 1961 defines the term income in an inclusive manner. So tax is payable on income, inclusive manner. Similarly, here also GST is payable on supply. The word supply is given in an inclusive manner. What do you mean by inclusive manner? So the scope is much wider than what is appearing. The scope of the definition is much wider than what is appearing. Okay, right. Anyway, first we will discuss these popular 8 forms of supply. Remember, these 8 forms of supply are only examples. It's not that only those are supplies. Anything can be considered as a supply. Remember 2 things: sale of immobile property, gift of immobile property, and lending of money. Okay, sale or purchase of securities. Other than this, for everything is included in the GST. Sale of immobile property, gift of immobile property, lending of money, sale or purchase of securities. You remove these 4. You remove these 4 and everything is included in the GST. That's why these 8 are only important. Sorry, these 8 are only examples, not the complete list of supply. Okay, right. So I'll discuss these popular items first one by one. Sale, transfer, barter, sale, transfer, barter, exchange, disposal. First, I'll discuss this. Sale, transfer, barter, exchange, disposal. So this license, rental, lease, I'll discuss later. So first let me complete these 5: sale, transfer, barter, exchange. The sale is relating to goods. Transfer is also relating to goods. Barter may be related to goods or services. The concept of barter is applicable either for goods or for services. The concept of exchange is also applicable for goods or services, whereas the concept of disposal is applicable only for goods. Okay, why the reason why I have taken first these 5 points, and then we are discussing those 3 points. The thing is that first I'm going to discuss the supply of goods, then we'll discuss the supply of services. Therefore, sale is related to goods, transfer is also related to goods, barter is related to both goods or services, exchange is also related to goods or services, disposal is related only to goods. Okay, right. So wherever goods are covered, now I am discussing. Whereas these three, license, rental, and lease, those are related to service only. Those are not related to goods. So these 5 are related to goods. Okay, right. So first thing. So in case of sale, what happens? Change in ownership. Change in ownership. Sale requires change in ownership. Transfer requires only change in possession of goods. Change in possession of goods or movement of goods from one place to another. Transfer does not involve change in ownership of goods. It only involves movement of goods from one place to another. Okay, barter. Right. So barter of goods or services also change in ownership. Change in ownership. Exchange also change in ownership. Disposal also change in ownership of goods. Okay, disposal also change in ownership of goods. The only difference in case of transfer, there is only change in possession of goods. In rest all the cases, the disposal of goods, change in ownership of the goods. Right. Next, then the difference between, what is the difference between this? Right. In case of sale, consideration is wholly monetary terms. Consideration is wholly in monetary terms. Consideration is wholly in monetary terms. In case of transfer, as there is no ownership is changed, no consideration. Okay, no consideration. In case of transfer, as there is no change in ownership of goods, okay, no consideration is involved. In case of barter, consideration is wholly in non-monetary terms. Consideration is wholly in non-monetary terms. Okay. In case of exchange, consideration is partly in monetary terms and partly non-monetary. Okay, consideration is partly in monetary terms and consideration is partly in non-monetary terms. This is the exchange. Sale, consideration is wholly in monetary terms. Next, in case of disposal also, consideration is wholly in monetary terms. Consideration may or may not be there. Okay, consideration may or may not be there. But if at all consideration is there, it is wholly in one. Consideration may or may not be. Sale, barter, exchange, definitely there is a consideration. Transfer, definitely there is no consideration. But in case of disposal, sometimes consideration will be there, sometimes consideration is not there. If at all consideration is there, that will be in monetary terms only. Okay. And another difference between sale and disposal is that sale is recurring in nature, disposal is non-recurring. That is the important point we need to identify. Right. Sale is recurring in nature, disposal is non-recurring in nature. Sale is recurring in nature, whereas disposal is non-recurring. Okay, so sale is recurring in nature and disposal is non-recurring in nature. These are the brief discussion of sale, transfer, barter, exchange. Now we'll see one by one few examples for these transactions. Look at this example. A shopkeeper sells a pen for rupees 100 to the buyer. After the sale, the pen belongs to the buyer and shopkeeper does not have any right on the pen. So shopkeeper does not have any right on the pen. That means what? The ownership of the pen is transferred to the buyer. Ownership of the pen is transferred to the buyer. It is a sale, the transfer of ownership. Next, similarly, Mr. X sold a laptop worth rupees 1 lakh and issued invoice in favor of Mr. Y. Ownership in laptop is transferred from X to Y. So there is here also transfer of ownership is there. Therefore, it is a sale. Next, and these are the transfers. A company transfers goods from its factory to the depot. So goods are transferred from factory to the depot. So both are belongs to the same entity. Factory and depot both belongs to the same legal entity. Therefore, there is no change in ownership of goods and no consideration is involved. It's only movement of goods from one place to another, factory to the depot. Okay, so sale has not yet taken place. No change in ownership of goods and no consideration. Okay, right. This is transfer. Next, when a new car worth rupees 5 lakhs is purchased in exchange of an old car along with monetary consideration of 4 lakhs. Look at this exchange. You are giving 4 lakhs of money and 1 lakh old car. 1 lakh worth old car and 4 lakhs worth money. That is called is this exchange. Consideration is partly in monetary terms and consideration is partly in non-monetary terms. Okay, look at me. A doctor got his haircut from a barber and provides his medical consultancy in return. Okay, so doctor is giving medical consultancy to the barber and barber is doing haircutting to the doctor. There is no money involved. In both cases, monetary, non-monetary consideration. In case of barter, consideration is wholly non-monetary terms. No money is involved. Doctor is giving medical advice to the barber. Barber is doing haircut to the doctor. No monetary consideration. The peculiar feature of barter is that two supplies are involved. Two supplies will be involved. Two supplies will be involved. So you need to understand the difference between supply and consideration. So what is the difference between supply and consideration? Okay. So supply is what moves from the supplier to the recipient is called supply. What moves from the recipient to the supplier is called consideration. Okay. So what moves from supplier to the recipient is supply. What moves from recipient to supply is called consideration. Okay, so what moves from supplier to the recipient is called supply. Okay, what moves from recipient to the supplier is called consideration. So this is always non-monetary. Okay, always non-monetary. This is always non-monetary. This is maybe non-monetary or maybe monetary or non-monetary. Okay, this is what you have to understand, the difference, basic difference between supply and consideration. Supply is what moves from supplier to the recipient. Consideration is what moves from recipient to the supplier. Consideration is what moves from recipient to supplier. Right. Supply. Therefore, supply is always non-monetary. Consideration will be monetary or non-monetary. So, in case of barter, two supplies are involved. In case of barter, two supplies are involved. Medical consultancy. Okay, doctor. Okay, doctor is giving medical consultancy to barber. Okay, doctor is giving medical consultancy to barber. Right. Okay, medical consultancy. Doctor is giving medical consultancy to barber. Doctor is giving medical consultancy to barber. Okay, barber is doing haircut to doctor. Doctor is doing medical consultancy to barber. Barber is doing haircut to doctor. Now, in this, who is supplier, who is recipient? Okay, medical consultancy, supplier, supply, recipient, consideration. Okay, so who is the supplier? In the first case, when the doctor is doing medical consultancy to the barber, who is the supplier? Doctor is the supplier. Doctor is the supplier. What is the supply he was doing? What he was supplying to the recipient? Medical consultancy. Okay, doctor is giving medical consultancy to whom? Barber. In return, what the barber is giving? Barber is doing haircut. In return, rather than giving money, barber is doing haircut to the doctor. Okay, this is what the who is the supplier? What is the nature of supply? What is the nature of supply, and what is the consideration? Who is receiving? Okay. So barber is doing haircut to the doctor. So who is the supplier here? Barber. What is the nature of supply? Haircut. Okay. Haircut is the nature of supply. Who is the recipient of service here? Doctor. What is the consideration given here? Medical consultancy. Okay. So therefore, we have to identify these basic aspects in any transaction. Therefore, if you observe the barter transaction, two supplies are involved, because in both the cases there is a supply. In one transaction, one person is a supply. In another transaction, another person is a supply. So far as medical consultancy is concerned, doctor is a supplier and barber is recipient. So far as haircut is concerned, barber is a supplier and doctor is a recipient. Okay, right. This is what the point. Barter involves two supplies. Consideration is wholly non-monetary. So there is nowhere money is involved. Doctor is not giving any money to the barber, and barber is not giving any money to the doctor. So consideration is wholly non-monetary terms. Okay, right. That is barter. Barter involves two supplies. Next, through a CA gives old laptops being used in his office to sell to his article students free of cost for their final preparation. Dhruv, a CA gives old laptops being used in his office to his article students free of cost for their final preparation. Look at this. So this a chartered accountant is giving laptops to his article students. It is not a recurring activity, one-time activity. Okay, it's not that every day they will do that, right? Every day CA will give professional advice, not giving free laptops to the students. This is a once in a while. So first of all, when the laptop is given to the students, change in ownership is there. So earlier, who is the owner? Chartered accountant is the owner. Earlier, chartered accountant is the CA, is the Dhruv, is the owner of the laptop. Now the owner of the laptop is a student. There is a change in ownership, and there is no consideration. Consideration may or may not be, I told you, right? There is no consideration here in this given case. And moreover, it is a non-recurring in nature. It's a non-recurring in nature. It is called as disposal. It is called as disposal. Okay, right. Now, it is called as a disposal. Now look at another barber transaction. Mr. CA, a practicing cost accountant, provided services to Mrs. XYZ Limited, dealer of laptops. In return, Mrs. XYZ Limited given to Mr. C two laptops. So this is for your assignment. As I solved this doctor example, okay, supplier, who is the supplier? What is the nature of supply? Who is the recipient? What is the consideration? You need to solve for this also. Okay, take it as an assignment and solve who is the supplier. Okay, what is the nature of supply, who is the recipient, and what is the consideration. Solve this example as an assignment. Next. Okay, so that's all with the goods. So related to the goods, these four are concerned: sale, transfer, barter, exchange, and disposal. Now we'll discuss those three: license, rent. Okay, license, lease, rent. license, lease, rent. Okay, right. Next. So license is giving permission to do something. These all the three are related to services only. These are not related to goods. This is related to services. This is also related to services, and this is also related to services. Okay, right. Next, license involves permission to do some activity. Okay, permission to do some activity. Permission to do something is called license. Permission to do something is called license. Look at this. Winman, a developer of tax related softwares, gave license to various CAs, CMAs, CS to use its software to meet its statutory compliance. Okay, they are giving permission to use their software. Okay, they are giving permission to use, they have developed one software and they are giving permission to us to use their software to meet our statutory compliances. Winman has developed one software and they are giving permission to us to use their software to meet our statutory compliances. Okay, right. This is called license. And next, lease. So lease and rent both are related to, lease and rent both are right to use mobile or immobile property. 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 Okay, so in both the cases, the same thing. Then what is the difference are between lease and rent? Okay, so lease consideration is in lump sum or in periodical payments. Lump sum or in periodical payments. Consideration is in lump sum or in periodical payments. So consideration is periodical payments. In case of rent, consideration is in periodical payments. Okay, right. So lease is normally for long term. Rent is normally for short term. Okay, normally for short term. And lease, lessee has more rights. Lessee has more rights. Okay, tenant has less rights. Okay, in case of rent, tenant has less rights. Unless otherwise specified, lessee has a right to sublease. Unless otherwise prohibited, unless otherwise prohibited, okay, lessee has a right to, unless otherwise prohibited, lessee has a right to sublease, right to sublease. Unless otherwise permitted, unless otherwise permitted, tenant does not have a right to subrent. Okay, right to give subrent. This is the thing. Okay, so both are granting the right to use mobile or immobile property, whereas rent is a short term, lease is a long term. Lessee has comparatively more rights, tenant has comparatively less rights. And lease consideration is in the form of lump sum or periodical payments. Rent is usually consideration is periodical payments. Okay, right. Now okay, so these three are related to services. Okay, now look at this one example. Merces XYZ Bank Limited given an asset under finance lease to Merces Y Limited. Repayment of rupees 80 lakhs, including rupees 50 lakhs principal. This is a peculiar transaction here. Finance lease was also covered under lease. The GST is payable on that. Okay. Right. Now, the concept here is two alternatives are there. Two alternatives are there. I'll show you two alternatives. Two options here to the banker. Option 1, option 2. Okay, so option 1, what? Banker disburses amount. Banker disburses amount to the vendor. What we are giving on an asset on lease. Okay, banker disburses amount to vendor. So who is vendor? Seller of the asset. Asset vendor. Okay, banker disperses amount to asset vendor. I want to purchase some equipment from Godrej or L&T, etc. Okay, banker disperses amount directly to asset vendor. Okay, so vendor dispatches asset. Vendor dispatches asset. Vendor dispatches asset to lessee. Vendor dispatches asset to lessee. So here the banker is banker disperses amount to asset vendor. Banker is at the first instance, banker is purchasing the asset. Remember, asset ownership is not with the lessee. Okay, vendor dispatches asset to the lessee. So before that, what I should say, banker purchases an asset rather than disperses amount. Banker, I'll write banker purchases an asset. Banker purchases an asset in its name. Okay, banker purchases an assets in its name. Okay, banker disburses amount to asset vendor. Banker purchases an asset in its name. Banker disperses amount to asset vendor. Banker disperses amount to asset vendor. Okay, banker is giving asset on lease. Banker is giving asset on lease to lessee. Banker is giving asset on lease to lessee. At the end of lease term, at the end of lease term, okay, the ownership of the asset is transferred to lessee. At the end of the lease term, ownership of the asset is lessee. So who is the owner of the asset first? So banker is the owner of the asset. Banker purchases an asset in its own name. Initially the ownership of asset is with the banker. Okay, so ownership of the asset is transferred to the lessee only at the end of the lease term. Ownership of the asset is transferred to the lessee only at the end of lease term. Banker purchases an asset in its name. Banker disperses amount to asset vendor. Banker is giving asset on lease to lessee. At the end of the lease term, ownership of the asset is transferred to lessee. Another concept is that banker disperses an amount to asset vendor. Banker disperses amount to asset vendor. Asset vendor dispatches asset. Asset vendor dispatches asset to borrower. Asset vendor dispatches asset to borrower. So here the person who is called lessee, the same person, another option is called borrower. So why borrower? Why borrower? Because the asset is in the name of the borrower. Asset is in the name of the borrower. Okay, asset is ownership of the asset. Ownership of the asset is in the name of the borrower. Ownership of the asset is in the name of the borrower from the very beginning. From the very beginning. Ownership of the asset is in the name of the borrower from the very beginning. So here, at the beginning, ownership of the asset is with the banker. Okay, at the beginning, ownership of the asset is with the banker. At the beginning, ownership of the asset is with the banker. At the end of the lease term, ownership of the asset is transferred to lessee. So here at the beginning itself, ownership of the asset is in the name of the borrower. The transaction between bank, okay, transaction between bank and Mr. A, asset disper, banker gives an asset, gives asset on lease to say Mr. A. I'll call Mr. A. The transaction between Mr. A and bank and Mr. A is lease transaction. Is a lease transaction. Is a lease transaction. It is treated as a supply. It is treated as a supply. Okay, same. The asset vendor dispatches asset to Mr. A. Transaction between bank and A. is a money lending transaction. Money lending transaction. Okay, money transaction between bank and A is a money lending transaction. It is transaction between A and between bank and A is a money lending transaction. It is not a supply. It is not a supply because money is excluded from the definition of both goods. Money is excluded from the definition of goods and also excluded from the definition of services. Okay, it is not a supply because money is excluded from the definition of goods and also excluded from the definition of services. That's why it is so. Therefore, if you observe at the end in both the options same, A is becoming the owner of the asset. At the end, the both transactions are same. A is becoming the owner of the asset. But initially, how the transaction is proceeded, that is very important. What is the similarities in both the options? A is using the asset. A is not put any money at the beginning of the asset. A is becoming owner at the end of the term. At the end of the term, A is becoming an owner. And what is, if you observe the similarities, okay, if I'll give the similarities in both cases. What is the similarities in both cases? First one, okay, okay, A is not putting, Mr. A is not putting any money. Mr. A is not putting any of his money. Mr. A is not putting money at the beginning. That is first thing, both common. In both cases, A is not putting any money. Next, Mr. A is using the asset. Mr. A is using the asset, say for 10 years. Mr. A is using the asset, say for 10 years. Okay, A is at the end of the 10 years. At the end of 10 years, A is a owner of the asset. These three are common in both the options. These three are common. Initially, A is not putting any money, and A is using the asset. In both the cases, A is using the asset for 10 years. After 10 years, in both the cases, A is owner. In the first option, A becomes a owner at the end of the 10 year. In the second option, A is the owner from the beginning of the year. After 10 years, he continues to be the owner. During the 10 years, he was using the asset. After 10 years, also he continues to be the owner. But in the first case, since it is a money lending transaction, it is not treated as a supply. So in the option 2, it is a money lending transaction. It is not a supply. Option 1, it is treated as a supply. That is called finance lease between banker and A. Okay, versus XYZ Bank Limited given an asset under a finance lease. Okay, so the same thing in the exam they will confuse. They will confuse. Normally, bank will give loan. That is a money lending transaction. It is not a supply. So here, bank is not given loan to Y. Bank has given a final asset to Y under finance lease. Okay, the difference is that banker retains ownership. When the asset is given on finance lease, banker being the owner of the asset. That is the services. So relating to goods, these 5. Relating to supply, these 3. Okay, relating to supply, these 3: license, lease, and rent. So these are the forms of supplies as we discussed. Okay, so these are only examples. As I told you, these are only examples, not exhaustive things. These are only examples. There's some problem in the pen. Will rectify the next class. Okay, right. Next. So this is completed. Different forms of supply: sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal. These are covered. Now the conditions. What are the conditions? So one is consideration. Conditions. One is consideration. Another one is in the course or furtherance of business. In the course or furtherance of business. Okay. Right. So I'll discuss one by one. What is the form of supply and what are the conditions to be satisfied? So first sale, sale. The term sale itself indicates, implies there is a consideration. Okay, so consideration is inbuilt in every sale. Without consideration we cannot call that transaction as a supply. Sorry, without consideration we cannot call the transaction as a sale. So therefore the very moment I am saying a particular word as sale means consideration is inbuilt. Okay, consideration will be there, consideration will be there. Okay, consideration will be there because the fact that I am using the word sale indicates that consideration will be there. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, if it is in the course or furtherance of business, if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as a supply. It is treated as supply. Okay, if it is not related to business, it is not treated as a supply. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as a supply. Consideration will be there always because the sale itself is consideration. Okay, right. Gift is not consideration. Gift is without consideration. When I say sale, it is a consideration. So if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as a supply. So if it is not in the course of business, okay, if it is not in the course of business, if it is not in the course or furtherance of business, it is not a supply. If it is not in the course or furtherance of business, it is not a supply. Look at this one example. There is one example in the board material. Right. Look at this. Rishabh buys a car for his personal use and after a year sells it to a car dealer. Sale of car by Rishabh to car dealer is not a supply because it is not in the course or furtherance of business. It is not in the course or furtherance of business. Ownership is there. Okay, there is a change in ownership, no doubt. Okay, consideration is there in monetary term, that is also okay, but it is not in the course of furtherance of business. Therefore, it is not a supply. It is not a supply. So supply must be in the course or furtherance of business. As the definition says, if you observe section 7, definition says, okay, so consideration as well as in the course or furtherance of business, both should be there. Sale means obviously there will be a consideration, but if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is a supply. If it is not in the course or furtherance of business, it is not a supply. Next, transfer, that is important. So transfer between distinct persons, transfer between related persons or distinct persons, transfer between related persons or distinct persons. As I told you, in case of transfer, above I have discussed transfer, there is no consideration, just movement of goods from one place to another. In case of transfer, as we discussed above, there is no consideration. Transfer, there is no consideration, only movement of goods from one place to another. So if the transfer is between distinct persons or related persons, even though it is not a consideration, even though there is no consideration, it is still treated as a supply. It is still treated as a supply if it is covered in schedule 1. Look at this. Supply of goods or services, schedule 1. Now I am discussing schedule 1. Schedule 1 second para. Schedule 1 second para. Supply of goods or services between related persons or distinct persons. The related persons or distinct persons, all these supplies are made without consideration. All these supplies are made without consideration. Therefore, when I say transfer between related persons or distinct persons, consideration won't be there. Okay, consideration won't be there. but still it is treated as a supply if it is in the course or furtherance of business. But still it can be treated as supply. But still it can be treated as supply provided if it is in the course or if it is in the course or furtherance of business. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, but still it can be treated as supply provided if it is in the course or furtherance of business. Transfer between other persons. Transfer between other persons. Okay, consideration won't be there. Consideration won't be there. Okay, not covered in schedule 1. Not covered in schedule 1. Therefore, not a supply. Therefore, not a supply. Obviously, it is not a supply. Transfer between other persons, consideration is not there. If consideration is not there, you have to check schedule 1. If it is covered in schedule 1, even if there is no consideration also, it is treated as a supply. So here it is not covered in schedule 1. Okay, but still it is considered as supply because it is covered in schedule 1. It is covered in schedule 1 exception. Schedule 1. It is covered in schedule 1. Okay, so since it is covered in both the cases, consideration is not there, but since it is specifically covered in schedule 1 exception, it is treated as a supply, but it must be in the course or furtherance of business. So here consideration is not there and not covered in schedule 1. Schedule covers only transfer between related persons or distinct persons. Okay, not covered in schedule 1. Transfer is a very big topic. There are many examples and many interlinkages are there that I'll discuss in a separate topic because now it will deviate. It gets deviated. I need more time to discuss the transfer. Many examples are there, many interlinks are there, many complications are there so far as transfer is concerned. I'll discuss the transfer topic separately. Now I'm giving the overview of these two. Section 7, subsection 1, class A and schedule 1. I'm giving the overview of this. Next, transfer between other persons. This is done. So what is our next transaction? Sale is done, transfer is done, and barter. Okay, so barter, exchange will be there, consideration will be there. Barter means change in ownership, consideration, and if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it will be transaction. Okay, barter. Okay, if it is in the course or furtherance of business, if it is, consideration will be there. If it is in the course or furtherance of, if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is a supply. Okay, exchange also the same thing because consideration will be there, similar to sale. These are similar to sale. These are similar to sale. Okay, consideration will be there. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as supply. If it is not in the course or furtherance of business, it is not a supply. Exchange also the same. Next, so transfer is done, barter is done, exchange is done, and disposal. Coming to the disposal, look at the disposal. Right. So far as disposal is concerned, as we discussed, there is no consideration. Okay, consideration won't be there. Consideration may disposal for a consideration. Look at this. Disposal for a consideration. Disposal for a consideration. So in the above example, whatever I've discussed, that you can call it as a disposal also because it is a non-recurring transaction. I have shown one example, right? So car which is used for personal use is given to dealer. That you can call it as a disposal also because it's a non-recurring transaction. Okay. So disposal for a consideration if it is in the course or furtherance of business. Furtherance of business. It is a supply. It is a supply. Otherwise, not supply. Otherwise, not a supply. Okay. Disposal for a consideration. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is a supply. Otherwise, it is not a supply. Next, disposal without consideration. Disposal without consideration, but ITC availed. Disposal without consideration, but ITC availed. So as said, there is no consideration. No consideration, no consideration, but covered in schedule 1. No consideration, but covered in schedule 1. Therefore, treated as supply. Treated as supply if it is in the course of if it is in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, right. This is the thing. No consideration, but covered in Schedule 1, treated as supply if it is in the course or furtherance of business. That is disposal without consideration, but ITC avoided. Look at this. Schedule 1, para 1. Permanent transfer or disposal of business assets where input tax credit has been availed on such assets. If input tax credit has been availed on such assets, then it is treated as a supply. Okay, but covered in Schedule 1, treated as a supply provided if it is in the course or furtherance of business. So disposal without consideration, but ITC blocked or ITC not available. ITC blocked or ITC not availed. I'll discuss this ITC blocked, ITC availed. That will discuss in a separate chapter. There is a separate chapter called as input tax credit. There we'll discuss it. Okay, so no consideration, not covered in Schedule 1, not covered in Schedule 1, not treated as a supply. Okay, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. This consideration and furtherance of business, both conditions should be satisfied. Consideration in the course or furtherance of business, both the conditions has to be satisfied. Since there is no consideration, second condition you need not check. Only both the conditions are satisfied, then only it is a supply. Okay, so either consideration or Schedule 1 plus in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, to treat it as a supply, there is only three things. Okay, remember this. To treat it as a supply, consideration or Schedule 1, and consideration or Schedule 1, and in the course or furtherance of business. This is the thing. Okay, consideration or Schedule 1, any one condition to be satisfied. Consideration or Schedule 1, any one condition should be satisfied, and in the course or furtherance of business. Here above, when I say there is no consideration, I am saying disposal without consideration and also not covered in Schedule 1. Disposal, no consideration, are also not covered in Schedule 1. Therefore, first these two conditions are not satisfied. I no need to check the second condition. I no need to check the second condition. Any one of these to be satisfied. Either there should be a consideration or it should be covered in Schedule 1. Okay, right. That is disposal without consideration, but ITC blocked or ITC not availed. Next. Okay, so these two are the Schedule 1 transactions. Next, gifts between employer and employee. Gifts between employer and employee. Gifts between employer, gifts up to 50,000. Gifts up to 50,000 per employee in a financial year. Per employee in a financial year. Gifts up to rupees 50,000 per employee in a financial year. Okay, so it is an example. So gift means no consideration. Gift means no consideration. Okay, gift means no consideration, but but employer and employee are related persons, but employer and employee are related persons, therefore covered in Schedule 1, therefore covered in para 2 of Schedule 1. This is important. Okay, so gift means no consideration, but employer and employee are related persons, therefore covered in para 2 of Schedule 1. However, specifically exempted, but the gift is up to rupees 50,000 excluded, exception to para 2. Okay, if the amount is up to 50,000, if the amount is up to 50,000 per employee, if the amount is up to rupees 50,000 per employee, it is excluded from Schedule 1. It is excluded from Schedule 1. Gifts and gift means no consideration, but employer or related persons, usually it is covered in Schedule 1. Okay, usually the transaction between employer and employee, gift transactions, it is covered in Schedule 1, but up to 50,000 it is excluded. Therefore, not a supply. Therefore, not a supply. Therefore, not a supply. Sir, why not a supply, sir? No consideration, because if no consideration means not covered in section 7, at least you have to see schedule 1. Schedule 1 is also not covered. Okay, since no consideration, it is not covered here. Since no consideration, it is not covered here. Since up to 50,000, they are specifically excluded. They are specifically excluded, shall not be treated as a supply. That specifically excluded, that is not treated as a supply. Gifts more than 50,000. Gifts more than 50,000. Same per employee per financial year. Per employee per financial year. Okay. So gift means no consideration, but employer and employee are treated as related persons. Okay. But employer and therefore covered in part 2 of schedule 1. Okay. Schedule 1 gives exception. Schedule 1 excludes only up to Schedule 1 excludes only up to 50,000. Only up to 50,000. Since transaction value is more than 50,000, it is a supply. More than 50,000, it is treated as a supply. More than 50,000, it is treated as a supply. So up to 50,000, not a supply. Okay, employer and employee, they are related persons. More than 50,000, it is a supply. Distinct persons will discuss separately in the registration chapter. Related persons also, wherever required, I'll discuss. There is a separate definition for distinct persons. There is a separate definition for related persons. Since I'm giving the overview, I'm not deviating that. There is a separate definition for consideration. There is a separate definition for goods. There is a separate definition for services. I'm not going to discuss each and every definition in this video, because I'm giving an overview of section 7. Okay, section 7, subsection 1, class A. I'm giving an only overview. Okay, those I'll discuss in a separate video. Right. Next, that is gifts. So next, transaction between agent and principal. This is also I'll discuss separately. Now I'm giving in brief, but I'll discuss separately. Agent and principal. Look at this. Supply of goods by a principal to his agent, where the agent undertakes to supply such goods on behalf of the principal. It is also a kind of transfer. When the agent is sending goods to the principal, change in ownership is not there. There is only movement of goods from principal place to the agent place. It is also a kind of transfer. There is no consideration. But since it is specifically covered in the schedule 1, it is treated as a supply. Okay, that's why I told you transfer I'll discuss separately. It's a very detailed topic. Okay, so supply of goods from principal to agent. Supply of goods from principal to agent. Okay, supply of goods from principal to agent. There is no consideration. It's only a transfer. It is a transfer. It is a transfer. It is a transfer of goods. Okay, it is a transfer of goods. Therefore, there is no change in ownership of goods. There is no change in ownership of goods. Only movement of goods from one place to another place. Okay, no consideration. No consideration, but covered in schedule 1. But covered in schedule 1. No consideration, but covered in schedule 1. Okay, treated as supply. So principal and agent relationship is in the course of principal and agent relationship. Agent relationship is always in the course or furtherance of business. In the course or furtherance of business. It is not a personal transaction. Okay, it is not a personal relationship. It is not a personal relationship. It is a business relationship. The business relationship. Look at this. Though there is no consideration, but it is covered in schedule 1. That means this condition is satisfied. As I told you, either consideration should be there or it should be covered in schedule 1. Even though there is no consideration, but it is covered in schedule 1. And moreover, the word principal and agent itself indicates it is a business relationship. Okay, so obviously it is covered under supply. It is treated as a supply. as supply. Both supply of goods from principal to agent and also supply of goods from agent to principal. Supply of goods from agent to principal. There is a detailed topic is there related to principal and agent. CBC circulars are there. What is del credit agent, etc., and all those things. I'll discuss that later. Okay, just take the overview of this. Next, import of services. Yes, it's a peculiar thing. Import of services is a peculiar thing. So when the services are imported from a related person, import or services from a related person. Okay, import of services from related persons. Import of services from related persons. Import of services from related persons for a consideration. Okay, import of services from a related persons. So if there is a consideration, it is covered in section 7 subsection 1 class A. Even if there is no consideration, it is covered in schedule 1. Okay, so therefore consideration, no, don't bother about the consideration. When the services are imported from related persons, consideration is irrelevant. If it is a consideration doesn't matter. If it is a consideration, it covered under section 7 subsection 1 class A, or if it is not consideration, it is covered in schedule 1. Okay, therefore no worry about the consideration. The only thing is about the in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, it must be in the course or furtherance of business. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, if there is a consideration, it will be covered in section 7 subsection 1 class A. Okay, if there is no consideration, it will be covered in para 5 of schedule 1, para 4 of schedule 1, para 4 of schedule 1. Okay, therefore consideration doesn't matter. Consideration does not matter. If it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as a supply. If it is in the course, if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as a supply. It is treated as, if it is in the course or furtherance of business, it is treated as a supply. Okay, if it is not otherwise, it is not a supply. It is not a supply. Otherwise, it is not a supply. Import of services from a related person. Right. Look at this. Another point is there within section 7, subsection 1. Another point is there. Import of services for a consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. Import of services for a consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. When I say import of others, you have to remove this. This is also separate discussion is there. Import of services, I'll show you. In the board metal, there is a separate detailed discussion is there. I'll discuss in detail later. Importation of services, detailed discussion is there. Okay, so I'll discuss this later. Now for the time being, so import of services from others. Okay, even if there is no consideration, import of services from others for a consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of a business. Import of services from others. Since it is others, it is not covered in schedule 1. Just remember, schedule 1 deals only with related parties. When I say import of services from others, forget about schedule 1. Concentrate only on section 7, subsection 1. Okay, so it concentrate only on section 7. It says for a consideration, whether or not if there is a consideration, if there is a consideration, it will be treated as a supply. It will be treated as a supply. It is immaterial whether or not it is, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, if it is not, if there is no consideration, if there is no consideration, okay, it is not covered in section 7. It is not covered in section 7 subsection 1 clause A, and also section not covered in not covered in section 7 subsection 1 clause B. Okay, if there is no consideration, it is not covered in section 7 subsection 1 clause A, and also not covered in section 7 subsection 1 clause B. Since the parties are not related classes, since the parties are not related, since the parties are not related, so look at this. Schedule 1 covers what? Schedule 1 covers only related parties. Schedule 1 covers only related parties. Therefore, Schedule 1 covers only import of service of related person. Therefore, if there is no consideration, the parties are not related, it is not covered in Schedule 1. Schedule 1. So, if it is not covered in Schedule 1, there is no exception from consideration. Consideration must be there. Okay, if it is covered in Schedule 1 only, will give relaxation for the requirement of from the condition. If it is not covered in Schedule 1, consideration must be there. If it is okay, therefore consideration is must. Therefore, consider no relaxation from the restraint of. Therefore, no relaxation from the condition of consideration. Okay, consideration is in general, consideration is mandatory, but if at all it is covered in Schedule 1, we will relax that condition. But since it is not covered in Schedule 1, there is no relaxation from condition of consideration. Therefore, if there is a consideration, it will be treated as a supply, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, so these two things. One is in this video I have covered these two things. So these two we have covered in this video. One is schedule section 7 subsection 1 clause A supply, and schedule 1 deemed supply. In further videos we will discuss each and every topic. Transfer will discuss in detail, consideration will discuss in detail, import of services will discuss in detail. Okay, thank you.